the reality was coming in 5 years later than them gave us a delay that we unfortunately weren't able to overcome.
Canada lost its bid for a seat on the UN Security Council. Now, this is something that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has been fighting for several years now, and he lost to Ireland and Norway. Now, I'm going to tell you, as a Canadian, why it's actually a good thing that Canada did not get a seat on the council. So this is basically a council that deals in international peace and security. They deal with authorizing, sanctions, military actions, peacekeeping missions. So there are 15 members, 5 permanent members in the US, the UK, France, Russia, China, and 10 rotating seats with 2-year terms. So Canada was going for one of those 10 rotating seats that have 2-year terms. Now, before I get to Trudeau's reaction to the loss, let me first give you some information here. So there's from the CBC. Norway and Ireland won the 2 available temporary seats with 130 and 128 votes respectively. Canada won 108 votes, falling 20 short of the 128 needed to win a spot at the table. Countries need the support of at least 2/3 of the General Assembly to get elected to the council. So Ireland here just barely made it with 128. If they had one less, then it would have gone to a second round where Canada would have had maybe a better shot at winning a seat in a second round, but it didn't go there. Canada lost to Norway and Ireland. First, let me show you Trudeau's reaction and what he claims is the reason that they didn't get this seat.
Obviously, I was pleased to be able to call Ireland and Norway last night and this morning to congratulate them for a well-run campaign and commit to them that we were going to continue to work with them on all our shared values on the world stage. But the reality was coming in 5 years later than them gave us a delay that we unfortunately weren't able to overcome. I was hoping we would, and we certainly worked hard to do it, but what we were able to do over the few years with this campaign was strengthen and deepen many, many ties and the impact that Canada has around the world in particularly turbulent times.
All right, so Trudeau's excuse is just, we came late to the bid. Ireland and Norway were there first. That's why they have seats. That's why we don't. His analysis doesn't go any further than that. Now, look, I'm not saying that wasn't a factor. I'm sure it was. But also, if you take a look at what Canada has done, what they have fought for, I mean, not only is it largely in line with U.S. foreign policy, which may have scared off a lot of the countries into supporting Canada into thinking, hey, if Canada's on here, it may just be a second seat for the U.S., because how often does Canada actually dissent when it comes to U.S. foreign policy? But also just what Canada has done in general. They have not been, or we have not been leaders as a country. So let me show you some of these examples. Canada's foreign aid spending, still below OECD average after budget boost. So when it comes to official development assistance, Canada spends only 0.26% of gross national income. The average is 0.32%. So we are below the average and well below the recommendation of 0.7%. So when it comes to already just foreign aid alone, we are well behind other countries. Also, Indigenous rights. Not only do we have issues here at home with Indigenous rights and how Indigenous people have been treated in Canada, but also when it comes to foreign policy. Canada backed a right-wing coup of an Indigenous leader, Evo Morales, in Bolivia, that finally the New York Times and other publications have recognized was a massive mistake. It would have helped if they recognized that back then. But Canada on the wrong side of that issue. When it comes to climate change, Canada also not a leader, buying a $4.5 billion pipeline and $9.3 billion Trans Mountain expansion overall. Again, talking big on climate change on the world stage, but in reality, actual moves at home continue fossil fuel production, only to further extend it into the future. Also, peacekeeping at historic lows. I mean, one of the major parts, one of the major factors of being on the UN Security Council is peacekeeping. Canada, historically low when it comes to peacekeeping. Also, when it comes to selling arms to the Saudis, the Saudi arms deal. I mean, on what planet did Canada deserve a spot on the UN Security Council? So you also had that. And, of course, Venezuela. Not only was Canada, or not simply, but just say this another way. Canada wasn't simply a follower on Venezuela. They were also a leader. So Canada and the Lima Group both worked together to try and oust Maduro. Another massive failure, not only failure in terms of getting him out, which I'm glad they didn't, but failure overall in taking that position to begin with. So on no planet should Canada have a seat on the UN Security Council. Now, let me show you a clip here. The CBC interviewed former Quebec Premier Jean Charest, who was part of the group fighting for this UN seat. And he brought something up in this interview twice that clearly shows Canada also had some other ideas when it came to what they wanted to do with this power.
We believe that the UN has to deal with the issue of economic security, which would be new because it's tied to everything else, and even private sector being involved in that. To the issue of economic security, I thought was very interesting, fairly simple, fairly straightforward. What it said to the rest of the world is we believe governments and the private sector, by the way, should be involved in building up the capacity of our economies and infrastructure and other things, and that this UN Security Council should also be paying attention to that if we want to live in a world that offers economic and all other forms of security.
All right. I'm not sure if you caught that, but twice he mentioned the private sector in the context of economic security. Now, to me, what this signifies is that Canada wanted to bring in the similar approach that the World Bank and the IMF have taken to the third world, where they have these structural adjustment programs. Structural adjustment programs aimed at underdeveloped countries that have debt, aimed at them as a way to sort of parachute in these multinational corporations while cutting into what they do in terms of the state. So dismantling the state when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to education, and bringing in this private sector free market approach. Now, we have seen the impact of that. The impact has been disastrous in terms of gutting these countries and forcing them to rely on multinational corporations instead of making them self-sustaining. So instead of these structural adjustment programs being investments into their education systems in these countries or their healthcare, what they have done instead is dismantle them in favor of private interests. And this is the perspective that Canada wanted to bring to the UN Security Council. So you can see here that clearly we did not deserve a seat. And it is a great thing that we did not get it. Now, I want to share just two tweets here that I caught online that I think also are worth sharing. So Paris Marx here, who has been on the show before, tweeted out, "That's what you get for backing coups, supporting mining giants, pushing pipelines instead of decarbonization, and making a half-assed return to peacekeeping. Ireland and Norway literally have right-wing governments, but still have more trust globally than Trudeau's Liberals." Indeed. Also, this one from Emmett McFarland saying, "Wanting a seat at the UN Security Council isn't a policy. What were we going to do with it? There was a nod to protecting the values of the liberal international order and to a feminist approach, but those require a comprehensive set of concrete objectives. Instead, we got window dressing." So yeah, this is another piece of it. Trudeau never really had any concrete objectives in terms of what they wanted to actually do with the power of having the UN Security Council seat. It was all just, hey, we're focused on multilateralism and working with other countries and, I guess, feminism. But there was no real clear defined issues when it came to what they were going to do with that power. So all these countries really had to go off of was what I showed you. Canada's history over the past several years of how terrible Canada has been when it comes to foreign policy. So, look, I don't know enough about Ireland and Norway. It's possible their perspectives aren't much different than Canada, but clearly, based on what we know, what Canada has done, what Trudeau has done, I think it's obvious they did not deserve a seat on this UN Security Council.